G'day guys, and welcome back to the Life Outside podcast, where we share stories from outside to hopefully inspire you to get outside as well. My name is Cam Bostock and I am solo once again on today's episode. I hope you guys aren't sick of all of these solo episodes back to back, but I have just returned from 2 months in Europe. I am back home in Australia as I'm recording this and went on some incredible hiking adventures during that 2-month trip. It was really awesome, and so I'm just sort of recapping all of those adventures to give you guys some insights into some of the trails that I walked. So first trail was the Camino de Santiago. I've done a couple of podcast episodes going over that trail with some of the people I walk with, which is really cool. And then last week's episode, I did a trail talk episode on the Tour de Mont Blanc, which was just an incredible week on trail. And the last big hike that I did in Europe was the Grand Tour des Écrins, which is a really, really incredible trail in the French Alps, and excited to chat a bit about that today. I'm going to go through a bit of the logistics and a bit of the information about the trail to start the episode, and then do a little day-by-day recap of my experience on the trail. I spent 10 days out on the Tour des Écrins, also known as the GR54, which I'll probably refer to it as that most of the time. But spent 10 days out there with a group of mates and go through that day by day. And at the end, I'll answer a few commonly asked questions about the trail as well. So should be a fun one if you're interested at all in hiking in the European Alps or trying to find a really cool trail to do in Europe. This could be the one for you. I will say it was a very difficult trail, probably not like beginner friendly, someone who's going out on their first multi-day hike, but it was one of my favorite hiking experiences ever. So really excited to dive back into the trail. I'm only about a week removed from finishing the track. I flew home back to Australia pretty much a day or two after finishing the trail, so it was a great way to end the Europe adventure. But it should be fun to reminisce a little bit. If you've listened to the Life Outside podcast for a while, you've probably heard me talk about OptiVenture. It's a company I co-founded with a simple mission: to provide comprehensive and convenient supplementation solutions for hikers and outdoor adventurers. We sold out of our version 1 all-in-one supplement within 24 hours of launch, and we're excited to finally announce that we're launching version 2, which we're calling OptiVenture Core, this August. It's been a lengthy process, but we weren't going to cut any corners, and we're so proud of what we've created. A day-night formulation with the highest quality ingredients to optimize energy, recovery, immunity, inflammation, and support your gut both on and off the trail. For more information and to stay up to date, check our website, optiventure.co, and make sure to sign up to our email newsletter. Thanks for the support, and let's get into today's episode. So the GR54, about 180 kilometers long. So it's a fairly long hike, and it's a very mountainous hike. The official route has almost 13,000 meters of elevation gain, and it's a looped trail, so that also means about 13,000 meters of elevation loss. You start and finish at the same point. We ended up walking quite a bit further than the official route, I guess. So 180 kilometers, 13,000 meters again is the typical route. We took a bunch of side trips, a bunch of alternate routes as usual, and walked about 240 kilometers in the end and just over 14,000 meters of elevation gain. So added quite a lot of distance, a lot of climbing as well to the route, but some of the side trips and the alternates that we took were well worth those extra miles, and I'll go through a bit of that in the day-by-day recap. Sorry, that was just unreal. It was honestly just one of the most beautiful trails I've ever walked. And I alluded to it, but I walked the trail with a group. So this is like the biggest group I've ever done a trail of this length with. I invited a bunch of my mates that I knew would be in Europe, and they were from all over the world. So I ended up getting about 10 or 11 people that agreed to come join me on the trail. So it was really cool to hike in such a big group, and kind of a different experience for me. I've obviously hiked in groups before, but typically are much smaller. So I was hiking with Daniel and Emma, who I've done a lot of hiking with, and I hiked the Camino and the TMB in Europe with, which you guys would already know about. But I also reunited with 2 other members of my trail family from the Pacific Crest Trail last year. So there was Dan and Emma, but also Chris and Lisa. If you watched my PCT vlogs last year, you would have seen their faces. They're both European, and so made the trip from Denmark and from Belgium, where each of those guys live, and joined us in France. So that was really cool to have a bit of a reunion with a few more of my PCT besties. It was a lot of fun catching up with those guys. And then, yeah, a couple of other people from the PCT last year that I didn't actually meet, but were on the trail at the same time, Alexa and Noel. Some of you guys might follow them on Instagram as well, a couple of content creators. And yeah, just know them through Instagram. And was like, yo, you want to come hike in the French Alps? And they made the trip over from America where they're from, which is really cool. And then, yeah, just a bunch of other mates as well, like some friends from Perth, Ike and Jenny, this other amazing hiker and content creator, Susie, who I met in Tasmania in Australia earlier this year. Oh yeah, Alexa invited one of her friends, Josiah. So that was really cool. He joined us for a bit. Yeah, we had a lot of people there, and it was just, yeah, it was so much fun catching up with old friends and just, deepening relationships with mates, spending 10 days on trail with a group of people. You're going to go through all the ups and the downs together. And, that was certainly true with this group, and very grateful that everyone came out and made it such a memorable experience. I'll give you guys a few stats and some information about the trail. So the GR54 is located, sort of southeast France in the French Alps, and it essentially does a big loop of the Écrins National Park, which is just a beautiful, really stunning wild national park, and a really popular area for hiking, for skiing in the winter. I believe the Tour de France has a leg that goes through part of the national park as well. So it's, a relatively popular area for adventure. And yeah, it's really rugged. It's pretty remote in places. I found it to be really diverse as well. Like the Tour de Mont Blanc was really beautiful, but I don't know, there was something about the GR54 that felt a little more diverse. There was a lot of different things. There was like alpine lakes, there was snow-capped peaks, there was really jagged, rugged high passes that were like technical. There was sections where it was almost climbing, like vertical and really, really tough and a little scary in parts, which I love. And then there was just beautiful valleys, there was rivers, there was just all kinds of stuff. And I think I actually prefer the GR54 over the TMB, and it's definitely a less popular hike and probably a little bit less known, but it's one that I would probably recommend over the TMB. It was really cool. And I just loved how diverse it was. And it was probably less touristy than a trail like the TMB, which is also a massive added bonus. It feels a little bit more wild, a little bit quieter. There were certainly parts of the GR54 that were really busy. There's a few sort of sections that are a part of smaller multi-day hikes or just really popular day hiking spots. And we saw, quite a lot of people in those areas, but there were also a lot of parts of the GR54 that were just really quiet and we had it to ourselves. And I really loved that. So I mentioned it's 180 kilometers long, a big loop with 12 to 13,000 meters of elevation gain. We did quite a bit more than that, 240 kilometers with 14,000 meters of gain. And that included, skipping some sections of the main route and taking alternates. And I would say it was probably an advanced level hike. It's really hard. Like, I think most people do it between 10 and 14 days. We as a group did it in 10 days. And I wouldn't say I felt like I pushed really hard on this trail. I have obviously quite a high level of hiking fitness. And so walking at the recommended length, which is about, 10 to 14 days, felt pretty comfortable for me. If I pushed much harder, though, it would have been really challenging. And there were sections that were just really tough. There's not really a flat part of this trail. It's 200 kilometers of ups and downs. There's no easy bit. And the downs are just as hard as the ups. They're often quite steep. They're often really long. And there was parts of this trail that was really technical as well. And, we had heavy packs. So it's a tough hike, really physical. Every day was super challenging in a really positive way. I love that about hiking, that it challenges you. And it was interesting because our group had a fairly diverse range of hiking experience. There were, a bunch of us that had walked trails like the Pacific Crest Trail, so super long, very experienced. And then there was a couple in the group that this was their longest hike ever. So yeah, I think everyone had their own challenges and found it, differing levels of difficult. But overall, yeah, we all got through it. We all made it to the end, and it wasn't without a few road bumps and a few hiccups, injuries and sickness, which, when I go through it day by day, I'll mention. But we all made it to the end despite the difficulty of the trail. As far as like accommodation along the trail, we camped every single night. But similar to other European hikes and a lot of other hikes in the Alps, there's refuges in the mountains there. So you definitely can stay in a refuge every night, like either a refuge or a town. And obviously they cost money and often need to be booked, but it is possible to walk this trail without camping too much. I definitely prefer to camp, and so that's what our entire group did. We were a little bit worried, being such a large group, would we be able to find suitable places to wild camp with, 8 to 10 tents? But we really didn't have any issues, to be honest. I think we paid for camping in towns 3 times maybe, and then the rest of the time we wild camped. There was a couple of times where we split up the group a little bit, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes just because that's how it worked out that day. But we always found enough room for all of our tents. So it's definitely possible to do it even with a fairly large group. And, camping the whole way gave us a lot of flexibility and freedom to walk however long we wanted to walk each day and sort of just change up our plan as we went. And if we decided like, oh, let's go climb that mountain and spend half the day doing this side trip, we could, because we knew we could pretty much just camp anywhere. There's obviously wild camping restrictions in place in France. Some parts of the trail you just couldn't camp, and the usual restrictions and curfews apply. So you can't set up your tent in a wild camping location before 7 p.m. and you have to be packed up and out of camp by 9 a.m. So we made sure to obviously follow all those regulations and had no issues at all. There's also, a bunch of villages and small towns in the mountains. And so we had opportunity to resupply food every 2 days at the maximum. I don't think it was longer than 2 days without a resupply. And so it was pretty chill in that regard. You could always find food, and we ate in towns, a nice meal every now and then as well, and never had to carry, too much supplies. So our pack weight was kept a bit lower for that, which was really nice. Typically, this trail's hiked in the summer. If you want to do the full sort of loop, in the winter, obviously there's a lot more snow and ice, and so it becomes a bit of a different adventure. But we hiked in the peak of summer, and the trail was walkable. We didn't really walk over much snow at all, and so that's the time to do it for sure. We had some hot days, as you'd expect, but the weather for the most part was pretty mild, which was nice. All right, let's get into a little day-by-day recap. I'm not going to spend too much time on each day. I'm just going to give you guys a bit of insight into how it went and maybe what to expect. But we spent 10 days out there, so I can't really spend more than a couple minutes on each, or I'll be here for a very long time. So we started in a small town called Les Bourgs d'Auxerre, and I've got to preface this by saying I'm going to mispronounce a lot of words again. I'm really bad at these French pronunciations, and I've been told off by a lot of French people on my Instagram with how terrible I pronounce the names, and I'm trying. I've looked up pronunciations, and even with that context, I'm still failing to pronounce things right. So I'm just going to say I'm so sorry, and it's just going to be like that. And there's I've written down a lot of names of the places from each day just to give you guys as much insight as possible. And I'm probably going to pronounce them all wrong. I'm so sorry. I'm going to try my very best. But we started in this small town called Les Bourgs d'Auxerre, and that is the typical starting point of the GR54. It's also where we ended. So it's a loop from this town all the way back to where we started. And we all met up. We actually all met in Grenoble, which is a bigger French city about an hour away. And then we drove together to this smaller town where we started the trail. We didn't start walking on day one till after midday, I believe. And so it was kind of like a half day. And as you'd expect, the town was, quite low altitude, and we climbed straight into the mountains. So most of the day was just climbing up to a pass. And the first day was probably the least interesting day of the whole trip. We had a really nice swim in this stream on the way up, which was nice, but there was quite a bit of road walking and not a whole lot to look at as we ascended into the mountains. We stopped by like a refuge towards the top of the pass, which was the high point of the day, which was really nice. And then we descended into this valley in the mountains a bit further in, and we found like a free camping area at a really small village, which I can't even remember the name of that village. I should have written that down, but we camped there with no issues, and it was like a yeah, a pretty relaxed first day. And I'm actually going to get up on my phone if you guys just bear with me for a second, because I want to get the distances that we walked each day to give you guys a bit of context if you're following along. And I was very smart and I didn't write down our daily distances. I do have my Strava here. So day one, we walked 22 kilometers with about 1,400 meters of elevation gain. So yeah, it was a half day, but we still put in some decent mileage and yeah, camped in that town. The next morning, we woke up bright and early and we had another big climb out of that little village that we started in. And we had our first views of like the Écrins massive, the main range, and there was just huge snow-capped peaks. When we got to the top of that climb that morning, it was just stunning. We actually took a little alternate route off the main trail to this viewpoint, and it was magic. We kind of like got our first glimpse of what we were walking around and through, and yeah, I was like, damn, this is going to be a good hike. Day two was really beautiful. And yeah, I kind of realized that yeah, our entire group was really fit and ready to hike on day two, because we ended up covering like almost 30 kilometers with a lot of elevation gain and loss. But we had so many breaks on that second day. I remember we just like stopped by this lake at one point and we just slept and ate food and chatted for like 2 hours. And we had many other breaks throughout the day, because we kind of just realized like we're all super fit because we're doing it over 10 days. We don't really need to walk crazy distances every day, and so we can just relax. And it was so nice. We actually met a group of, I think they were like park rangers, or I'm not sure exactly what their roles were, but there was a group of people that were at this trail intersection where lots of people were walking through, and they were like educating hikers on a bunch of things about Écrins National Park, which was really interesting. We chatted with them for ages. They were teaching us about the wildlife and the birds of prey and alpine lakes, telling us that we shouldn't swim in the alpine lakes just to take care of sort of the delicate ecosystems, which was nice to know. So we took that advice on and didn't end up swimming in any lakes. And they also taught us about a bit about the agriculture in the Alps. There's a lot of sheep and a lot of cows in the mountains out here. And I guess for the longest time, the mountains have been used as grazing areas for these sheeps. And the interesting part of it is like there's often a shepherd and a bunch of sheepdogs that will protect the herds from wolves. And so these people that we met, the rangers, were teaching us a bit about what to do when you come across sheepdogs, because the sheepdogs are trained to be super protective of the sheep, obviously, and they'll run up to you, they'll bark and get right in your face to try and scare you off. And you've got to just kind of de-escalate the situation and let the dog know that you're just a human, you're not here to, get the sheep, you're just hiking. And they gave us a few techniques to get through those situations, relatively incident free. And that came in handy, actually. We're really glad that we chatted to them about that, because there was many times, there's one time in particular where a bunch of dogs, like, 3 dogs ran up to us as we walked past a herd of sheep. And I just remembered what the rangers were teaching us, and, and it worked out quite nicely. The dogs are super smart. They catch on pretty quickly that you're not here to cause any harm, and they'll let you go by. But it is a bit scary because they're big mountain dogs that are bred to just, kill wolves or kill predators that come for the sheep. So that was really cool chatting to those guys. And we ended up descending into a small town called La Grave there, and we camped at a paid campsite that night. So the first 2 nights we actually slept in towns. The second night was a paid campsite, and they had this like little burger truck at the campsite, and we got burgers for dinner, which was a nice treat. Actually, it was really cool. And I remember just the sunset over the main range, which you could see from our campsite, was just so magical. Night 2 was, despite not being wild camping and not being out in the mountains, it was so stunning. We actually camped next to this Dutch family at the campsite in town that we ended up chatting to a bit that night. They had this beautiful puppy, and this family was traveling in a renovated ambulance, and every summer they would spend a couple months just road tripping Europe. There was like, I think 3 kids and a mum and a dad and a dog, and that was so nice. And had some good chats with them. And I mentioned the Dutch family because on the morning of day 3, we woke up at this campsite and we had a pretty slow start. The whole crew went into town and we got coffee and we got pastries. And then I returned to the campsite because Susie, one of the people I was hiking with, was feeling quite ill that morning. So I just went back to check on her, and the Dutch family were there and they just invited me and Susie to go have coffee with them. And I was like, of course. Most of the coffee I had had up until that point in Europe was pretty terrible, and these guys were like brewing it themselves, and it was a really good coffee. And yeah, Susie and I ended up chatting with these guys for like ages, like an hour or two. And I don't think we left camp till like 11 a.m. or 11:30 or something. And so half the day was kind of gone, but it was just so nice to meet these strangers at a campsite and yeah, just have great conversations, share stories either way. And Marianne, which was the mother in the family, she actually hand makes these little plushy toys, and they were called modis or moddies. And she gifted me and Susie a little moddy each. And so for the rest of the GR54, we had these little plushies hanging off our pack, and it was really, really cool. I'll leave a link to Marianne's business in the podcast notes because, yeah, she was very gracious to gift us her little plushies and they kept us company for the rest of the hike. And if you guys are interested in checking it out, go do that. But we did say goodbye to the Dutch family, and then we had a long ascent up to a high pass that day, and Susie and I were well behind the rest of the crew. And yeah, Susie was quite sick, so we moved pretty slowly, but credit to Susie, she pushed through and dragged herself over the pass. We had a really nice swim at a waterfall, which was a nice pick-me-up, and then we made it to the high pass. I ended up taking a little side trip up to some alpine lakes, which were really stunning. At that point, Noel, we reunited with Noel, and yeah, me and Noel went up to see these lakes. It was really stunning. And then we made our way down over the other side of the pass, and the group actually ended up camping separately on this night, which happened a few times throughout the trek. But yeah, it was a big day in the end. I walked, I think, 32 kilometers, which I think was the longest day on the GR54 for me. 32K, another 1,400 meters of gain, but just a stunning day. I mean, I just remember walking past all these alpine streams and waterfalls and really bright blue water and just stunning. There were lots of marmots as well up at the pass on this day. We didn't see too much wildlife, but there were lots of marmots around, which I love. So day 3 was epic, and day 4 we woke up separately, and we walked into a town early that morning and regrouped and got coffee and pastries, which became a bit of a theme whenever we had access to a town. The morning buddy coffee and pastries were always a winner. And today we had planned to camp on this alpine lake, which was off the GR54. It was like an alternate route you could take. And so we didn't actually make much progress on the GR54 itself today. We ended up walking 20 kilometers on day 4 with 2,000 meters of elevation gain. It was a huge day, but I think we only covered like 8 kilometers or something on the GR54 route, but ended up being probably my favorite day on trail. So we took a couple of side trip summits pretty early on in the day. I've got the names of the summits. So it was Roche de Lorette and Pointe des Sneets, and both of those peaks were just under 3,000 meters. One of them was like a via ferrata to get to the top, like cables and steps, and they were a lot of fun. Yeah, I just love taking side trips off the main route, and any chance we got to summit a big mountain off the trail we took. And obviously you can drop your pack if you're taking a side trip, and so it makes it a bit easier to climb the mountain. But we did 2 big peaks on the morning of day 4. And then, yeah, we took this side trail to this alpine lake called Lac de l'Écora, which I'm definitely pronouncing wrong. But it's a really famous lake, and I learned the next morning that it's a really popular day hiking spot as well, because lots of people were climbing up. But we managed to secure a bunch of campsites right next to that lake, which was like 2,500 meters above sea level. And if you've seen some of my content on Instagram, you'll see how beautiful the sunset was that night. It was one of my favorite campsites ever on the end of day 4. It was just magical. You know, all of our tents set up right next to this lake with just backdrops of mountains in every direction and just beautiful color in the sky. And we all had dinner together and played some cards. It was really special. Unfortunately, the next morning I woke up feeling really sick, which kind of put a bit of a damper on the location that I was in. Yeah, we're a big group and we were always sharing food and drink, which is typically what happens in a trail family. Like you share snacks and you share drinks. And as I alluded to the day before with Susie, she was a bit unwell. Chris was also a bit sick the last couple of days on trail. And I must have just caught something from someone. And I woke up on day 5 just feeling terrible. Yeah, I crawled out of my tent just wanting to vomit, and I was just really nauseous. And it was, I just remember looking up and seeing the most incredible sunrise from camp next to the lake and not being able to enjoy it. So I left camp really late that morning. It was like another 11 a.m. start for me. Like I packed up my tent just before the 9 a.m. curfew, and then I just sat there and lied down and just hating life, not wanting to start hiking for the day. And I ended up vomiting all over the backcountry. Sorry if that's a bit too much information, but I vomited, which made me feel a bit better. And then I held on and made the long descent from our campsite. And luckily, it was probably like our easiest day of hiking that we had planned. It was about 20 kilometers, but it was all downhill. And so I think that's the only reason I was able to get through it. I felt so weak. I couldn't eat the entire day. And I didn't puke again or anything, but just felt really uneasy. I caught up to the rest of the crew in a town in the valley, and yeah, just felt like crap. But we pushed on and found a really cool spot to wild camp at the beginning of the next climb, and I was just hoping that the next morning I would wake up feeling better. Well, we got to camp and we were camping next to the river, and everyone decided they wanted to go for a swim, and that honestly just like really changed how I was feeling. I was like feeling pretty sorry for myself when I got to camp, but then I jumped in the cold water. It was like a bit of a reset. Everyone was there having a laugh, and I was like, okay, all is good in the world again. I'm just going to try and get a good sleep. And yeah, luckily at the morning of day 6, I woke up. I felt quite a lot better. I wasn't nauseous anymore. I was able to actually eat food, which made all the difference. You know, obviously, anyone who's hiked big days on trail before knows that if you don't eat, you don't move. You just burn through so many calories, spending, this many hours moving every day. And I was very lucky to be able to eat on day 6. And so, we began the climb, and it was a long day of climbing on day 6. I think, what kind of vert did we do? We did almost 2,000 meters on day 6, and it was just like most of the day was just climbing. It was like 26 kilometers of just uphill, and I wasn't feeling 100%, but I was feeling strong enough to get it done, which was good. Had another beautiful swim on the way up because we were just following this river, or like this cascading river that came down the valley. It was like glacier melt. And me, Emma, and Dan found like a really epic little canyon spot where we could jump in and swim right under a waterfall. And it was so cold, but it felt so good. Nothing better than an icy swim. And we eventually made it to the pass for the day and descended down to this refuge, which was just in the middle of nowhere. And we camped there. It's actually like a super busy camping area, like next to this refuge. I think this is one of the spots where a lot of people come just for a couple of days, and that mixed with anyone who was walking the full loop made it, extremely busy. There would have been like 50 tents at this refuge, but we found a little area where we could set up and be away from everyone, and it was really nice. I was able to eat dinner and enjoy the sunset, and we had some good chats, and yeah, ended up being a really good day. And I remember getting a really good sleep that night as well, something like 9 hours, which on trail is solid. And I woke up on the morning of day 7 feeling pretty much back to 100%, which was nice. Day 7, we planned to push into the town of La Chapelle. We hadn't seen a town, the day before, except in the morning. And so we really wanted to camp in a town for the end of this day, and because we didn't really resupply for, much longer than 2 days. And so it was going to be a pretty long day. Luckily, I think most of the group was feeling pretty well, pretty close to like 100% at this point. I forgot to mention that on day 1, Ike, who's my mate from Perth, actually rolled his ankle. really badly, and I think he actually tore a ligament or something. And so I say everyone felt pretty well at this point, but the entire 10 days, Ike had an ankle the size of like a soccer ball. It was ballooned up and like black and purple, like bruised, and it was nasty. And he was hurting. He was hurting every day, but somehow pushing through. So I think at this point, most of the sickness from everyone was gone, but there was a few injuries around, and Ike was hurting for sure. But credit to him, he's a freaking beast. The mental fortitude to push through was very impressive. But yeah, we planned to push pretty hard today to make it to that town. Ended up doing almost 30 kilometers again with 1,500 meters of gain. So a pretty big day. I think we crossed 3 high passes on day 7, and all 3 were pretty tough. And at the end of the 3rd high pass, I took a little side trip up to this mountain, which was cool, and just dropped my pack and actually did a little bit of a trail run up to this like 2,800 meter peak or something, and it was really stunning. We had great weather. I remember having great weather on day 7, and then we had like a 2,000 meter descent into the town that we planned to camp at. So, those are the kind of descents where they end up being just as hard as a big ascent. They're just so tough on the joints and the muscles. But we made it to town, and it was a lovely night camping in town, and we ate out and had burgers and a really good feed at the local like restaurant, and we did a full resupply in town that day as well, which was awesome. And then day 8 we woke up, and at camp the night before we had all been sort of planning what we're going to do the next day, and there was like a really big alternate route option that we could take. And about half the group decided to take the alternate, and the other half decided to take the normal route. I was back to full health, and I was like, hell yeah, I want to take the alternate route. So that's what I did, along with a couple of others. Ended up being a super steep climb straight out of town. We passed by a couple of waterfalls, which was stunning, and then moved into some really sort of technical trail up to this high pass. And then there was like a side trip off our alternate route up to this big mountain called Peak Turbat. And that was our highest point on the whole trail, summiting Peak Turbat. It was our first time reaching over 3,000 meters of elevation gain in the whole of Europe as well. So something I really wanted to do. But that mountain climb ended up being super, super hard. I think Jenny, Dan, Emma, Susie, and I were the ones who did it. And it was super technical, super steep, and obviously, a big climb. It was over 3,000 meters. And I think we started in town at like 1,000 meters that morning. So just a huge climb without any respite at all. But the summit was unreal. So beautiful. And I remember all 5 of us that made the summit did not bring enough water up because we dropped our packs and just took the bare essentials. And so I ended up like going off trail to this little ridge nearby the summit and getting a bunch of snow and melting it in my water bottle. And that was what got us back down, because I think all of us actually were pretty dehydrated and pretty worn out by the time we made the summit. But the views from the top were incredible. It was like a proper peak. And so you had 360 views. There was this like 3,500 peak nearby that you had crazy views of. It was one of the highlights of the whole trip for sure, even though it was super hard. We ended up doing like 20 kilometers that day, and then like 2,300 meters of vertical gain and some similar amount of vertical descent. So you could do the math there. It was very steep on average all day, and we were pretty cooked by the end of it. Because the group had split up, half the group were quite a lot ahead of us at the end of the day as well. We couldn't quite catch up to them because of all the extra effort it took to climb that mountain and do the alternate route. And so we camped separately that night. Our group were, quite a few hours behind, and we had this really cool little wild camping spot that was in this like protected little valley. And it was actually really nice. But I think all of us were very happy to get into bed by the end of day 8. The next morning, though, would be mission catch up to the front runners, and this is day 9. And it was our last full day on trail as well, and we started really early. I think we got up before 6 a.m., which was pretty much our earliest start, and we had a couple of massive passes to do on day 9, and we had got a few messages from the the crew that was ahead of us, and they were mentioning how some of the descents and ascents were really, really challenging. And so we knew we were in for a pretty massive day on day 9. I mean, we did like over 2,000 meters of the day before on day 8, and we ended up doing 2,600 meters of ascent on day 9. So it was bigger and almost 30 kilometers as well. It was such a tough day. And it was a particularly hot day as well. I think towards the end of the trail, France was kind of going into a heat wave. And so, man, day 9 was freaking hard. And it was weird because there was like a weird lack of water on the trail that day as well. So there was multiple times the 5 of us ran out of water and we're just starting to get dehydrated. There was a point where Dan and I took like a 2-hour nap on some rocks under like this one tree that we could shelter under, and like that was the kind of day it was, just like waiting out the heat, getting water wherever we could, and just going up, down, and it was just hectic. And the last high pass of the day was probably the hardest. It was just so steep. It was just like, it was kind of really sketchy and slippery. It was these switchbacks built into this really shaly rock, and it just did not feel secure. And then this wind would just whip up the pass. And so there was multiple times on the way up where we just have to stop and like take cover from all the dust and stuff because you couldn't see anything. It was hectic, but we pushed through as always, and we made it. We made it to this refuge near this lake called Lac de la Moselle, and that was also a really popular spot for like overnighters. There's this 2-lake circuit that a lot of people do. And so the campsite near the refuge, there would have been maybe 100 to 200 tents. Like, it was insane. It was a huge camping area, but there was a lot of people. And that is where we finally caught up to the rest of the gang and sort of reunited. And yeah, it was a big day. We were so cooked at the end of day 9. But it was the kind of thing where like we knew we were finishing the next day. And so it was like, just give it everything. Tomorrow's mostly descending. We got it done, set up camp, and had a good sleep. Woke up on the morning of day 10 and just had a little climb up to the last high pass of the trip, which was pretty easy. And then the rest of the day was just descending. We walked past the second lake on that lake circuit that a lot of people were hiking, and it was really nice. It was beautiful and blue and really cold, and we had a good swim in that lake, which was one of the few lakes that it seemed completely legal to swim in. There was no signs, and there was freaking hundreds of people swimming in that lake. It was called Lake L'Orvitel. So that was really nice. And then, yeah, it was just kind of like a long cruisy descent back into Le Bourg d'Assans, where we finished. And that completed our loop. Yeah, just so beautiful. So beautiful. Yeah, it's hard to rank where this hike would, be out of all the hikes I've done, but it's like a top 5 to 10 hike for me of all time. So one that I definitely recommend if you're up for a challenging, fairly long adventure that isn't as long as like a big through hike. And yeah, just really cool. And I had the best time hiking with a group as well. So that was our 10 days on trail. I'm just going to go through and answer a few questions really quickly. We've already gone for 40 minutes. Jeez. All right. Going to do a few questions and then we'll wrap it up. First question, someone asked, how does the GR54 compare to the TMB? That's a good question, actually, because I was constantly comparing the two in my brain during this trip. And I preferred the GR54 over the TMB. The main reason was, it was definitely more wild. There was less people and less civilization. It was still the Alps, so there was refuges and the occasional road and villages up there, but it was distinctly less busy than the TMB, which I very much enjoyed. And I mentioned it earlier, but it was just a bit more of a diverse trail, I found. There was more different things to look at and to do, and different alternates and that kind of stuff each day, that I felt like I just got a lot more out of the trail. And so, yeah, I prefer the GR54 over the TMB. It's definitely not as iconic or as famous or as popular, but I would choose that trail over the TMB. Someone asked, would you hike the trail again? And that's a question that I asked a few of the group at the end of it. And I don't think I would hike either the GR54 or the TMB again, just because of the sheer amount of people on the trails. Both trails, I'm so happy that I did, and both trails were incredible, but I probably wouldn't hike either again, just because I'm not interested in doing a trail that's going to have so many people on it. There are a lot of trails that I've hiked before that I would 100% hike again, and typically those trails are ones that aren't super busy and that are more wild. So I guess that's probably the main difference there. Someone asked, do you need to book accommodation? So you guys are probably used to it by now, but I don't plan or book anything on my hikes. That was true once again for the GR54. Of course, we camped every night, mostly wild camped, and so obviously you don't need to book anything. We just had to make sure there was space and a suitable location, which is really nice and allows a lot of flexibility. But yeah, you do have to book the refuges if you want to stay in them. And obviously, if you want to stay in towns and stay in hotels or Airbnbs, you have to book those as well. So it really just depends on how you want to hike the trail. But don't expect to just show up to a refuge and get a spot, because we found that they were pretty busy, the ones that we passed by. What's resupply like? Yeah, resupply was super easy throughout the whole trek. Lots of little villages. Most of them had, little tiny general stores or, medium-sized supermarkets. And I was just resupplying baguettes and cheese and salami and typical trail snacks every day. Nothing fancy, but no issues resupplying. Like I said earlier, no more than 2 days without resupply for us. How busy was the trail? Yeah, I think I mentioned that a bit earlier as well, but some sections that were particularly popular for like 2-day hikes or day hiking were extremely busy, like annoyingly busy, where you had to dodge people and overtake people pretty often. But there was large swaths of the trail that were pretty much empty, and like some sections, especially the alternates that we took, where you just didn't see anyone else. So a bit of mixture of both, but definitely less busy than the TMB. The TMB, you just saw people every day, and some days you couldn't get a piece of trail without another human inside. What was it like hiking in a group of 10? Yeah, it's a good question, because I've never hiked with a group that big, but I just freaking loved it. It helps that I just had the most incredible group of 10 humans that you could possibly assemble. A bunch of just thru hikers, a bunch of hiker trash, people that are just willing to push themselves, get filthy, not complain, get the job done. And everyone in our group just really has this awe for the outdoors, which is just so infectious and so cool to be around. Every view, every cold swim, every ascent, everyone's just happy to be there and really takes it all in. And honestly, it was so much fun. Probably the reason that this was one of my favorite hikes ever, a big part of it was the group that I was hiking with. And so I loved it. I've done a lot of solo hiking. I've done hiking with just one other person, and now I've done hiking with a fairly large group of people. And I'm starting to lean towards enjoying these big groups more than ever, and more than solo hiking and all that kind of stuff, which I never really thought I would say. But I just loved it so much, and I have so much love for the crew that I walked with. So if any of you guys are listening, love you guys. You're all the best. All right, that's all the questions. So I'll wrap this up before I tick over an hour for an episode of Trail Talk, which is not what I particularly want to do. Hope you guys enjoyed the insights into the GR54. Feel free to leave a comment on Spotify or YouTube, wherever you're listening as well, if you did enjoy these episodes and you got something out of it, or maybe if you went and hiked the trail after listening to me talk about it. I'd love, love, love to hear about it. And also let me know, do you guys enjoy these solo Trail Talk episodes? They seem to be getting similar amount of viewership compared to the episodes that I have guests on. So yeah, I'd love to hear some feedback. I really enjoy chatting about my experiences on trail, and hopefully you guys enjoy listening as well. If you do enjoy, as always, make sure to hit the follow or subscribe wherever you're listening, and leave us a 5-star rating. We've just passed 150 5-star ratings on Spotify, which blows my mind, because that is just a ridiculous amount of people to make the effort to rate a podcast that they listen to. And it just, I feel so blessed that you guys are enjoying the Life Outside podcast. So yeah, drop all of that good stuff, the likes, the follows, the rates, the comments, drop that below. Really appreciate you all. And I'll be back next week with some more guest podcasts. I've got now that I'm back in Australia, I've lined up a bunch of really exciting guests, and I'm just so keen to get back into the regular groove of weekly podcasts, talking to awesome people. It was really hard in Europe to keep up with these weekly episodes. As you might have noticed, I missed a week or two in there, so good to be back home and back into the rhythm. All right, I'll see you guys next week, and peace.